My name is Aria Winters, and for 4 years, I lived as two completely different people to discover if the man I loved could see past a bank account to love the real me. What I uncovered wasn't just betrayal, it was a carefully orchestrated deception that would change everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and human nature. At 28, I was living what most people would call a fairy tale. Heiress to Winters Tech Solutions, a cybersecurity empire my grandfather built from nothing in Silicon Valley. Our company protected some of the world's largest corporations, and our family name opened doors that most people could only dream of walking through. But fairy tales, I learned, can become prisons when you're never sure if people love you or your last name. That's why I created Aria Chin, a struggling graphic designer who lived in a cramped studio apartment in Oakland, took the BART to work every morning, and counted every dollar. Aria Chin had student loans, shopped at thrift stores, and made her own coffee because Starbucks was a luxury she couldn't afford. Aria Chin was everything Aria Winters wasn't: ordinary, relatable, and completely invisible to the society pages. I met Jonathan Rivera through Aria Chin. He was a third-year law student at UC Berkeley, volunteering at a legal aid clinic where I'd started doing pro bono graphic design work. The first time I saw him, he was hunched over case files in the clinic's tiny break room, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and highlighter-stained legal pads. "You look like you need better caffeine," I said, offering him the extra coffee I'd brought. He looked up, and I saw tired brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you an angel?" "Because I've been running on convenience store coffee for 3 days. Just a fellow caffeine addict with decent taste in beans." That was the beginning of everything. Jonathan was brilliant, passionate about social justice, and had this way of talking about changing the world that made me believe it was actually possible. He worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for law school, tutoring, researching for professors, and weekend shifts at a legal document service. Every conversation revealed another layer of his determination to build something meaningful from nothing. Within 2 months, I was completely in love. Not with his potential or his ambition, but with the way he made me laugh until my sides hurt, how he remembered that I liked extra foam in my lattes, and the gentle way he spoke to elderly clients who were too proud to admit they needed help. That's when I made the decision that would define the next 4 years of my life. I was going to support Jonathan through law school, not as Aria Winters with unlimited resources, but as Aria Chin, a woman who believed in him enough to sacrifice for their shared future. I told him I'd gotten a promotion at the small design agency where I supposedly worked. The truth was more complicated. I'd actually bought the agency, through a shell company, naturally, and installed myself as a mid-level designer with a mysteriously generous salary. Every month, I transferred exactly $3,200 to Jonathan for tuition and living expenses, an amount that stretched Aria Chen's fictional budget but wouldn't raise suspicions about hidden wealth. The double life became an art form. Monday through Friday, I was Aria Chen, wearing carefully curated thrift store finds and taking packed lunches to work. I learned to check grocery store prices, to wait for sales, to hesitate over purchases the way someone with limited resources actually would. But every Friday night, I'd drive to a private garage downtown, change into designer clothes, and become Aria Winters again. Board meetings, charity galas, and conversations about quarterly projections in conference rooms overlooking the bay. My father never understood it. "Sweetheart, this masquerade has gone on long enough," he'd say during our weekly dinners at the family estate. "If this young man truly loves you, he'll love all of you." "But how will I know?" I'd reply. "How will I know if he loves me or if he loves what I can give him?" My father would pour another glass of wine and shake his head. "Love that requires deception isn't love at all, Aria. It's a performance with an inevitable final act." He was right, of course. But I was 24 when I met Jonathan, and I thought I could control every variable, predict every outcome. I thought if I just managed the deception carefully enough, love would triumph over logistics. For 3 years, it worked. Jonathan graduated law school summa cum laude, landed a position at a prestigious firm specializing in corporate defense, and we moved in together, into Arya Chen's modest one-bedroom apartment in Oakland. Not the penthouse I owned in the financial district. I watched him work 18-hour days, building his career with the same determination that had gotten him through school. He was grateful for my support, but never curious about how a graphic designer could consistently afford to help with law school tuition. He'd kiss my forehead and call me his miracle worker, but he never asked to see my bank statements or questioned how I always seemed to have money when he needed it most. That should have been my first warning sign. The second warning sign came during his celebration dinner after becoming a junior partner. We were at a modest Italian restaurant, the kind of place Arya Chen could afford for special occasions, when Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and I saw his expression change. "Work emergency?" I asked. "Something like that." He put the phone face down on the table. "Sorry, babe. You know how it is." But I caught a glimpse of the message preview. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Same place as last week." I spent that night staring at the ceiling while Jonathan slept peacefully beside me, his phone charging on the nightstand like a bomb waiting to explode. Trust, once cracked, becomes a magnifying glass that turns every innocent interaction into potential evidence of betrayal. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. The way Jonathan's cologne had changed to something more expensive. How he'd started working late every Thursday, always Thursday, for what he called client development dinners. The credit card bills arrived at his office instead of our apartment. The phone calls he took in the bathroom with the shower running. But it was the watch that broke me. Jonathan had always worn a simple Timex, a graduation gift from his grandmother. One morning, I noticed it had been replaced with a Rolex Submariner, a $15,000 watch that cost more than most people's cars. "Nice watch," I said carefully. "New client gift?" "Oh, this." He glanced at his wrist like he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "It's a replica. Got it from one of those street vendors downtown." Pretty convincing, right? I nodded and smiled, but my heart was breaking. Because I knew watches. I'd been buying them for corporate gifts for years. That wasn't a replica. That was the real thing, and Jonathan was lying to my face about how he'd acquired it. That weekend, while Jonathan attended a mandatory partner retreat, I hired a private investigator. If you're captivated by this story and want to see how far deception can go, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't believe the shocking truth that's about to be revealed, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The PI's name was Marcus Stone, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. I met him at a coffee shop in San Francisco, far from any place Jonathan might see us. "I need to know if my boyfriend is having an affair," I said, sliding him an envelope containing Jonathan's photo and basic information. Marcus studied the photo. "How long have you been together?" "For years. Living together for one." "Any specific suspicions, or just a feeling?" I told him about the Thursday night meetings, the expensive watch, the secretive phone calls. Marcus nodded, making notes. "Standard surveillance package runs about $2,000 for the first week," he said. "But I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find?" I thought about that question for a long time. Was I prepared to discover that the man I'd spent 4 years supporting, the man I'd altered my entire life for, was cheating on me? Was I prepared to learn that my elaborate test of true love had failed? "I need to know the truth," I said finally. "Whatever it costs." What Marcus discovered was worse than an affair. It was a systematic pattern of deception that made my own double life look like child's play. The first photos arrived in my email 3 days later. Jonathan left our apartment on Thursday evening, but instead of heading to his supposed client dinner, he drove to the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. The same hotel, Marcus noted, that he'd visited every Thursday for the past 2 months. But he wasn't meeting another woman. He was meeting another version of himself. The photos showed Jonathan entering the hotel's business center, then emerging 20 minutes later completely transformed. The wire-rimmed glasses were gone, replaced by contact lenses. His hair was styled differently. His clothes had changed from the business casual attire he'd left home wearing to an expensive suit I'd never seen before. Then he'd drive to restaurants and bars in Pacific Heights and Nob Hill, places where Arya Chin could never afford to eat, places where the clientele was San Francisco's elite. Young tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and old money families. And somehow, Jonathan fit right in. Marcus's report was thorough and devastating. Through careful observation and some discreet inquiries, he discovered that Jonathan was presenting himself as Jonathan Reeves, heir to an East Coast real estate fortune, in town to explore West Coast investment opportunities. He'd been cultivating relationships with wealthy women, particularly those involved in family foundations and charitable organizations. The Rolex wasn't a gift from a client. It was purchased with funds from 3 different sources: a loan from Patricia Hawthorne, daughter of a pharmaceutical fortune, an advance on a fake investment opportunity he'd pitched to Caroline Zhang, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels, and a donation to his fictional foundation from Elena Rodriguez, who'd inherited her family's shipping company. Jonathan wasn't just cheating on me. He was running elaborate cons on multiple women, using his legal training to create convincing documentation for fake investment opportunities and his natural charm to extract money from lonely heiresses. And the most devastating part? He was using the same techniques on me that he used on them. The gratitude for my financial support, the promises of our future together, the careful way he made me feel special for believing in him. It was all scripted, all calculated, all part of a larger pattern. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop, staring at Marcus's photos and feeling like the ground beneath me was dissolving. For 4 years, I'd been testing Jonathan's ability to love me without my money. The entire time, he'd been systematically stealing from other women while treating my support as his due. The irony was suffocating. I'd been pretending to be poor to test his love, while he'd been pretending to be rich to exploit others' generosity. We were both living lies, but only one of us was destroying lives in the process. Marcus had included a detailed financial breakdown in his report. Based on his conservative estimates, Jonathan had extracted over $200,000 from various women over the past 18 months. The money funded his expensive tastes, the watch, the clothes, the dinners at high-end restaurants where he courted new marks. But there was something else in the report that made my blood run cold. A conversation Marcus had recorded between Jonathan and his apparent accomplice, a man named David Chin, who provided false documentation and background stories for Jonathan's various personas. "The Chin girl is getting too comfortable," Jonathan's voice was clear on the recording. "She's starting to ask about marriage, about our future. It might be time to phase her out." "Before or after bar exam results?" David asked. "After. I want to make sure I pass before I make any major changes. But once I'm officially a lawyer, I won't need her steady payments anymore. I can target bigger fish." "What about the others?" "Patricia's good for at least another 50 grand before she gets suspicious. Caroline's worth more, but she's getting clingy. Elena's the real prize. Her family's foundation has millions, and she's lonely enough to make some very generous donations to the right cause." "And if Chin gets suspicious?" Jonathan laughed, a sound that turned my stomach. "What's she going to do? Report me for accepting gifts from my loving girlfriend? She gave me the money willingly. There's no crime in accepting generosity." I turned off the recording and sat in silence, processing the magnitude of Jonathan's betrayal. He wasn't just stealing from multiple women. He was planning to discard me like a used tissue the moment I was no longer useful. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Jonathan. I wasn't going to cry or rage or demand explanations. I was going to do something much more effective. I was going to destroy him, systematically and completely, using the same careful planning he'd used to destroy others. But first, I had to save his other victims. I started with Patricia Hawthorne. Through discreet inquiries, the kind that are easy when your family moves in the same social circles. I learned that she was a gentle soul who'd never recovered from her divorce 3 years earlier. She'd met Jonathan Reeves at a charity auction and been charmed by his apparent dedication to helping underprivileged children get legal aid. I arranged to accidentally encounter her at a gallery opening in Union Square. As Aria Winters, of course, Patricia would never have given Ariadne the time of day. Patricia? Patricia Hawthorne. I approached her during a quiet moment between exhibitions. Aria Winters. I think we met at the Children's Hospital fundraiser last year. Her face lit up with recognition. Of course. Your family's cybersecurity foundation. How lovely to see you again. We chatted about art and mutual acquaintances for several minutes before I carefully steered the conversation where I needed it to go. I hope you don't mind me asking, but a friend mentioned you'd been seeing someone new. That's wonderful. You deserve happiness after everything you've been through. Patricia's smile became cautious. Well, it's still early days. His name is Jonathan. He's involved in legal aid work. How meaningful. What kind of legal aid? Oh, children's advocacy. He's starting a foundation to provide legal representation for kids in foster care. It's exactly the kind of work my father always supported. My heart broke for her. Jonathan had researched her family's charitable history and created a fictional foundation that perfectly aligned with her values. That's incredible, I said. I'd love to learn more about his work. Perhaps we could all have dinner sometime. I'd like that, Patricia said, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. Though Jonathan is quite private about his work. He says too much publicity can interfere with sensitive cases. Of course he did. The last thing a con artist wants is scrutiny. That evening, I called Patricia. I hope you don't think this is inappropriate, I began, but after our conversation today, I did some research on children's advocacy organizations. I wanted to see if there were ways our foundations might collaborate. That's very thoughtful of you. Here's the thing, though. I can't find any record of Jonathan Reeves or his foundation in any of the legal aid databases. Not in California, not nationally. Are you sure you have the name right? The silence on the other end of the line stretched painfully long. Patricia? Are you there? Yes. I'm here. Her voice was small, uncertain. Maybe he's still in the process of getting official recognition. These things take time, don't they? They do, I agreed gently. But Patricia, legitimate foundations register with the state before they start accepting donations. It's legally required. I think you should be very careful before giving him any more money. Another long silence. Then, how much do you know about him? Enough to be concerned about you. Can we meet? I think there are some things you should see. We met the next day at her penthouse apartment in Pacific Heights. I brought copies of Marcus's surveillance photos, the ones showing Jonathan entering and leaving the hotel where he transformed into different personas. Patricia studied the photos with growing horror. These are from different days, but he's wearing different clothes in each one. Expensive clothes. She trailed off. Clothes you helped pay for? She nodded, tears starting to fall. He said he'd lost his luggage on a business trip. Asked if I could help him replace a few essential items until his insurance claim went through. It was only $5,000. Only $5,000. To Patricia, that was pocket change. To Jonathan, it was a month's worth of luxury. How much have you given him total? I asked gently. $37,000. Her voice was barely a whisper. For the foundation, for his personal expenses when he was helping particularly difficult cases. He said the work was emotionally draining, that he sometimes needed to get away to clear his head. I showed her the rest of Marcus's evidence. The fake documentation, the recorded conversations, the proof that Jonathan Reeves didn't exist outside of Jonathan Rivera's imagination. I feel so stupid, Patricia sobbed. How could I be so naive? You're not stupid, I said firmly. You're generous and trusting, and he exploited those qualities. That makes him a predator, not you a fool. Patricia agreed to help me contact the other victims. Caroline Zhang was harder to convince. She'd given Jonathan nearly $50,000 and was emotionally invested in believing his story. But when faced with photographic evidence of his deception, she broke down and admitted she'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too embarrassed to investigate. Elena Rodriguez was the angriest of the three. She'd grown up in a family business where trust was earned through actions, not words, and she was furious with herself for being taken in by Jonathan's performance. "What do we do now?" Caroline asked during our meeting at Elena's downtown office. "Do we call the police?" "We could," I said. "But prosecuting these kinds of cases is complicated." He's technically a lawyer now, and he's been careful to structure everything as gifts rather than theft. A good defense attorney could argue that you all gave him money willingly. "So he gets away with it?" Elena's voice was sharp with anger. "Not exactly." I pulled out a folder I'd been preparing for days. "I have a different kind of justice in mind." My plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to prove criminal fraud, we were going to destroy Jonathan's ability to continue his cons by exposing him to the communities he was targeting. First, I used my family's connections to ensure that every major charity and foundation in the Bay Area received a discreet briefing about Jonathan Rivera/Reeves and his various fraudulent personas, complete with photos, documentation, and testimony from his victims. Second, we contacted the California State Bar Association. While Jonathan's cons might not be prosecutable as criminal fraud, they definitely violated the ethical standards required of practicing attorneys. The evidence we provided would trigger a formal investigation that could result in his disbarment. Third, and most satisfying, we orchestrated a public revelation at the venue where Jonathan felt most comfortable, a high-end charity auction in Pacific Heights. The event was a fundraiser for literacy programs, attended by exactly the kind of wealthy, socially conscious women Jonathan preferred to target. Patricia, Caroline, and Elena were all regular attendees, and their presence wouldn't seem unusual. What would seem unusual was Aria Winters making a surprise appearance with a very special presentation. I arrived at the auction fashionably late, wearing a black dress that cost more than Jonathan made in a month as Aria Chin. I'd coordinated with the event organizers, who were happy to accommodate a Winters family request to add a last-minute presentation about protecting charitable giving from fraud. Jonathan was there, of course, working the room as Jonathan Reeves. I watched him charm a young woman whose family had made their fortune in renewable energy, listening to him describe his fictional foundation with the same passionate conviction I'd once found so attractive. He didn't notice me at first. Why would he? In his mind, Aria Chin was safely tucked away in Oakland, probably asleep after another long day at her imaginary design job. When my turn came to speak, I took the microphone with steady hands and a smile that felt like a blade. "Good evening, everyone. I want to talk to you tonight about a subject that's unfortunately becoming more common in our community: charity fraud and the people who exploit our generosity." I saw Jonathan freeze at the sound of my voice. His head turned slowly toward the stage, and I watched all the color drain from his face as he recognized me. "For the past several months," I continued, "a man has been attending events like this one, claiming to represent various charitable causes. He's used multiple identities, multiple stories, and multiple fraudulent documents to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars from trusting donors." The room was dead silent now. Jonathan had begun moving toward the exit, but security guards, who I'd briefed earlier, were positioned at all the doors. "This man's real name is Jonathan Rivera. Some of you may know him as Jonathan Reeves, or perhaps he introduced himself by another name entirely. But whatever name he used, his goal was the same: to exploit your compassion for his personal gain." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, Jonathan's photo alongside copies of his fake documentation. Mr. Rivera is a licensed attorney who has used his legal training to create convincing but fraudulent investment opportunities and charitable foundations. He's stolen from single mothers trying to help children in foster care. He's conned widows looking to honor their late husband's charitable legacies. And he's betrayed the trust of women who believed they were supporting important social causes. The murmurs in the audience were growing louder. I could see people turning to look at Jonathan, who was trapped near the back of the room. I'm sharing this information tonight because predators like Mr. Rivera count on shame and embarrassment to keep their victims silent. They count on good people being too humiliated to warn others. But there's no shame in being deceived by someone who's made deception their profession. I clicked to the next slide. Testimonials from Patricia, Caroline, and Elena, who had bravely agreed to share their stories. If you've been approached by Jonathan Rivera or Jonathan Reeves, please speak with the representatives from the State Attorney General's office who are here tonight. If you know someone who may have been targeted, please share this information with them. And if you're ever unsure about a charitable opportunity, please don't hesitate to verify the organization's legitimacy before contributing. I found Jonathan in the crowd and looked directly at him. Fraud thrives in darkness and dies in the light. Tonight, we're turning on all the lights. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Jonathan tried to run, but the security guards I'd arranged were waiting. He was escorted out in handcuffs while news cameras, also alerted in advance, captured every moment. The story dominated local news for weeks. Society Lawyers' $1 million con, read the Chronicle's headline. Fake foundation scammer targets wealthy women, announced the Examiner. But the most satisfying headline appeared in the legal press. Attorney Jonathan Rivera disbarred for ethical violations. The State Bar Association moved faster than I'd expected, officially revoking Jonathan's license to practice law in California and reporting his case to other state bars to prevent him from practicing elsewhere. Without his law degree, without his carefully constructed personas, without access to the wealthy social circles he'd infiltrated, Jonathan Rivera was reduced to exactly what he'd always been, a con artist whose cons had finally caught up with him. I never spoke to him again. There was nothing left to say. The hardest part was explaining everything to my father, who listened to the entire story without interruption before pouring us both a very large glass of scotch. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "Not for the deception. That was foolish and dangerous. But for how you handled the truth when you found it." "I feel like an idiot," I admitted. "For years of my life, wasted on someone who never loved me at all." "Not wasted," he said firmly. "You learned something invaluable about yourself. You learned that you're strong enough to love someone without needing them to be something they're not. You also learned that you're strong enough to walk away when love becomes exploitation." He was right, but it took months for that lesson to feel like comfort instead of consolation. I eventually told Patricia, Caroline, and Elena the full truth about who I was and why I'd been able to help them. Their reactions varied. Patricia was fascinated by the psychology of my double life. Caroline was impressed by my investigative skills, and Elena immediately tried to recruit me for her family's business. "You have excellent instincts for fraud detection," she said. "Have you ever considered a career in forensic accounting?" I hadn't, but the idea was intriguing. Using my resources and skills to help other people avoid the kind of exploitation I'd experienced felt like a way to transform my pain into purpose. 6 months after the auction, I started the Winters Foundation for Financial Fraud Prevention. We provide resources for victims of romance scams, investment fraud, and charity cons. We also fund investigations into complex financial crimes that might otherwise go unprosecuted. My first case was helping an elderly man in Sacramento who'd lost his life savings to a fake cryptocurrency investment scheme. My second was exposing a fake charity that claimed to help hurricane victims, but was actually funding the founder's luxury lifestyle. Each case taught me something new about human nature, both its capacity for cruelty and its resilience in the face of betrayal. I learned that fraud victims aren't naive or stupid. They're simply people who encountered someone more skilled at deception than they were at detection. I also learned that healing from betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about using what you learned to protect yourself and others from similar harm. A year after Jonathan's arrest, I was featured on the cover of the San Francisco Business Journal with the headline, "From Victim to Victor: How One Woman Turned Personal Betrayal into Public Service." The article detailed the foundation's work and my journey from heiress to fraud investigator. The morning the article hit newsstands, I received an unexpected email. The sender was listed as J. Rivera, and for a moment, my heart stopped. But it wasn't from Jonathan. It was from his younger sister, Maria, who'd seen the article and wanted to apologize for her brother's actions. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know that our family is horrified by what Jonathan did. We had no idea about any of it. We thought he was building a legitimate law practice." She went on to explain that Jonathan was serving a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating with federal investigators tracking similar scams. He'd provided information about other con artists he'd encountered, helping to break up a network of people who specialized in targeting wealthy women through fake charities and investment schemes. "He asked me to tell you that he knows he doesn't deserve forgiveness, but he wants you to know that your intelligence and strength saved other people from what he did to you," Maria concluded. "He said to tell you that you were the only person who ever saw through him completely." I stared at that email for a long time, trying to feel something other than indifference. Anger would have been satisfying. Sadness would have felt appropriate. Even hatred would have been understandable. But what I felt was nothing. Jonathan Rivera had become a stranger to me, someone whose choices had taught me valuable lessons, but who no longer had any power to hurt or heal me. I deleted the email without responding and went back to work on a case involving a fake veterans charity that was stealing from the families of wounded soldiers. There were better ways to spend my energy than processing apologies from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. 2 years later, I met David Kim at a conference on financial crimes. He was an FBI agent specializing in complex fraud cases, and we bonded over our shared frustration with how difficult it was to prosecute sophisticated con artists. Our first date was at a coffee shop in downtown San Francisco. Our second was at a lecture about cryptocurrency fraud. Our third was dinner at a restaurant that David chose specifically because it was moderately priced and not trying to impress anyone. "I should probably tell you," David said over dessert, "that I looked you up before we went out. I know about your foundation, about what happened with your ex. I want you to know that I'm here because I think you're brilliant and beautiful and fascinating, not because of your family's money." "I appreciate that," I said. "But just so you know, I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. If we're going to do this, you're getting the real me, foundation work, family money, trust issues, and all." "I was hoping you'd say that," he smiled. "I've been pretending to like coffee shop dates, but I'd really love to take you somewhere we can get wine that doesn't come from a box." We both started laughing, and I realized that this was what honest attraction felt like. No games, no tests, no elaborate deceptions. Just two people who liked each other enough to be themselves from the very beginning. David and I have been together for 3 years now. He proposed last month at the Foundation's annual fundraiser, in front of all the fraud victims and law enforcement officials who've become our extended family. The ring he chose was beautiful but not ostentatious, the choice of someone who understands that love is about the person, not the gesture. When people ask me if I regret the 4 years I spent with Jonathan, my answer surprises them. I don't regret loving him, even though that love was based on lies. I don't regret supporting him, even though he was supporting others with my money. I don't even regret creating Ariachin, even though that persona nearly cost me my sanity. What I regret is not trusting my instincts sooner. I regret giving someone the benefit of the doubt long after they'd proven they didn't deserve it. And I regret all the time I wasted trying to be someone else instead of demanding that the people in my life accept who I really was. But those regrets taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. They taught me that love without honesty is just elaborate manipulation. They taught me that generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. And they taught me that the strongest thing you can do when someone betrays your trust is to use that experience to protect others from similar harm. The foundation has now helped over 200 fraud victims recover more than $15 million in stolen assets. We've contributed to the prosecution of 47 con artists and the shutdown of dozens of fraudulent organizations. Each case reminds me that my experience with Jonathan, painful as it was, prepared me to help people when they needed it most. Sometimes victims ask me how I moved past the anger, how I learned to trust again after such a complete betrayal. The answer is complicated, but it comes down to this. I decided that Jonathan's choices said everything about him and nothing about me. His ability to lie didn't make me gullible. His willingness to steal didn't make me foolish. His capacity for manipulation didn't make me weak. What it made me was informed. And informed people, I've learned, are very dangerous to those who profit from deception. 3 months ago, I received a wedding invitation that made me smile. Patricia Hawthorne was marrying a man she'd met through a volunteer program at the Children's Hospital. The invitation included a handwritten note. "Thank you for teaching me that real love doesn't need to hide in shadows or ask for money. This time, I'm marrying someone who loves me enough to be completely honest from day one." Caroline Zhang sent a similar update last year. She'd started her own nonprofit focused on financial literacy for young women, helping them recognize and avoid the kinds of scams that had fooled her. Elena Rodriguez became one of the foundation's largest donors and most effective board members, using her business connections to identify and investigate suspected fraud cases. We all turned our pain into purpose, our betrayal into protection for others. That feels like the best possible ending to a story that began with deception. As for Jonathan Rivera, he was released from federal prison 8 months ago. According to the terms of his plea agreement, he's forbidden from working in finance, law, or fundraising for the rest of his life. He's also required to make restitution payments to his victims, though given his current employment prospects, those payments will likely take decades to complete. I heard through law enforcement contacts that he's working construction in Nevada under court supervision, living in a small apartment, and driving a 10-year-old car. It's probably the most honest life he's ever lived, even if it took federal prosecution to force him into it. I don't take satisfaction in his downfall, but I don't feel sorry for him either. He made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences. That's not justice, it's just accountability, which is sometimes the best outcome you can hope for. The most important lesson I learned from those 4 years isn't about fraud or betrayal or the importance of background checks. It's about the difference between love and performance. Love sees you completely and chooses to stay. Performance sees you as an audience for someone else's carefully crafted show. Love grows stronger with honesty. Performance crumbles the moment the lights come up and the real person becomes visible. Jonathan never loved me. He loved the supporting role I played in his elaborate production. But David loves me, the real me, with all my complexities and contradictions and trust issues. The me who runs a fraud prevention foundation and still checks his references anyway. The me who believes in second chances but documents everything in case first chances go wrong. That's the woman I should have been from the beginning, someone strong enough to demand authenticity and smart enough to recognize performance when I see it. My name is Aria Winters, and I learned the hard way that the most dangerous deception isn't the lie someone tells you about themselves. It's the lie you tell yourself about who you need to be to deserve love. Real love doesn't require auditions. It doesn't demand that you prove your worth through sacrifice or pretend to be someone else to earn affection. Real love sees exactly who you are and says, yes, this person. This complicated, imperfect, completely authentic person. That's the love worth waiting for. That's the love worth protecting. And that's the love I'm building my life around now, not as Aria Chin or as Aria Winters, but as myself, completely and unapologetically. Aria's journey from deception to authenticity reminds us that love built on lies will always crumble, but strength built from betrayal can last forever. Her story proves that sometimes the most painful experiences become our greatest sources of wisdom and power. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. And when you find someone who loves the real you, messy, complicated, and completely honest, hold on to them with everything you have. What would you have done in Aria's situation? How do you know when love is real versus performance? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about love, deception, and the courage to start over.